Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In today's first segment, we're going to discuss a story coming out of Bangladesh, a very disturbing story, that of Abrar Fahad, 21-year-old undergraduate student who was beaten at least for 4 hours by Awami League's youth party, or youth section, I should say, after he posted comments criticizing the current government of Sheikh Hasina, as well as its deals with India and the like. What does this say about Bangladesh and the right to free speech in that country, especially on university campuses? And is this really the kind of Bangladesh and the kind of country that you would want to design going forward, especially when it comes to the youth, who are many times forced to take part in events supportive of the government at university campuses as well? Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined by all of our guests who are joining us now from Dhaka, the Bangladesh capital. We're joined by Abdullah Shamil Siddique, who is a youth activist and member of the TRT correspondent group. He was in fact at the venue of the incident the whole day that this incident with Abrar Fahad took place. We're also joined by MD Kamruzzaman, who is a journalist, freelance journalist, I should say, with the Analyst agency of Turkey. And we're joined by Morshed Hasan as well, who is a diplomatic correspondent of Channel 24. Thank you all for joining us, Morshed, Kamruzzaman, and Abdullah. Abdullah, I'd like to start with you. What can you tell us about what occurred on the day that you were there when it came to Abrar Fahad?
So I was there the whole day, like you said before. What happened was that in October 7th in the morning, the dead body was found in the dormitory that Abrar Fahad lived in. He was supposed to be the safest person there because in a university campus, the university is supposed to protect the students living in there under their roof. But after he posted the status criticizing the current policies regarding Bangladesh government and Indian government, he posted it on 5th October. On 6th October around 11 p.m., the student wing of the current government, Bangladesh Chhatra League, took him to the room 2011 and started torturing him, questioning him. All this footage, all this evidence was captured on the CCTV of the dormitory. And after this happened, the students of the Buer started protesting immediately, and the police came as soon as possible, and they took 15. As currently right now, 15 students were 15 alleged criminals were taken to police custody, and 13 of them are on remand right now.
Okay.
So,
all right. So let me bring in the others as well. Kamruzzaman, this is certainly a very disturbing story, isn't it? What are your thoughts about it? What does this mean for free speech under Sheikh Hasina?
Actually, the present government, our government is claiming that they are on behalf of free speech, and media is enjoying freedom of speech as well as all activists. But the ground reality is totally different. Especially the activities of ruling Awami League parties, the student wing, Bangladesh Chhatra League, they are very often in most of the university campuses. The scenario is almost same. Whenever anyone raises his voice against any activities of the government, he or she face this type of situation. And that the right activists very seriously expressed their concern on this incident, because the student is a very simple and normal student. He just posted on his Facebook page criticizing some points of the treaty Bangladesh and India signed in the last visit of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina in India. And Chhatra League took him from his room and tortured him seriously. And the main criticism is that this is the right to say anything. And Chhatra League is not any force that have the right to take any on this way and torture or criticizing the government. If there is anything very much objectionable, there is law enforcement, there is court.
Indeed. So, Morshed, I wanted to get your thoughts on that as well. We're all journalists, and we know the importance of free speech, especially at university campuses. Do you think that this is essentially the reality on the ground there in Bangladesh? And what do you then make of the government's reaction to this case?
First of all, this is a very unusual accident that took place in Buet, Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology. Such accident never took place. Yes, there were some ragging things, but no one died before this one. And as there's some criticism on Facebook that some deals been done with the neighbors by Bangladesh, but the criticism still is on Facebook, on Twitter, on editorials, on stuff like that. So I really cannot say the freedom of speech is really a way for whatever the mass people do. But this is very accidental event that really took place. And the other day when the people started...
Morshed, I'm sorry, I'm going to come in, I'm going to push you because you said this is an accident, but if somebody is beaten for 4 hours, that doesn't really sound like an accident to me.
Well, that's under investigation. Before the investigation ends, I cannot really say anything because we have, as we are journalists, we listen to the law and order people, and whatever they find in investigation, after that we can say that it was accident or it was pre-planned. From the far, they seem that pre-planned, but after the investigation, you really can sort out what really happened, and we are really waiting for that. And before that, I cannot say it's planned or not.
All right, that's fair enough. Yeah, go ahead, Morshed, if you wanted to complete your thought.
Yeah. So the criticism is there that whatever been signed is not going to help in Bangladesh in that way. But it's really sad that people are not ready to accept whatever you write or do criticism on Facebook or anywhere. That's really not acceptable, whatever it's been done. So we are really looking forward to the investigation, and from the top of the Bangladesh authority, it's been told that the investigation will bring all the people, all make the crime into justice. So we also have to look into that.
Okay, so let's talk about the investigation then. If you allow me, Morshed, I wanted to go to Abdullah with that. Abdullah, because again, you were at the scene of this incident. Are you confident that authorities will investigate this properly, that those who have been arrested, if they are guilty, will actually be held to account?
Okay. We have to look at the past incidents that took place on Buet or Dhaka University or other universities. I want to recall an incident that happened in 2013 or 14. I can't recall it right now. A PhD student in Buet, the same university that Abrar was reading in. His name was Shiraj, and he was going to Buet to submit his PhD papers. And when the Bangladesh Chhatra League again accused him of being a part of Bangladesh Chhatra Shibir and beat him so badly, the recent images are surfacing on the internet again because he could have died at the same incident again, but the police, Bangladesh police or the government or the Buet authority didn't take any type of action against that. And if we look furthermore, in 2012, there was a guy named Bishwajit who was beaten to death in front of Jagannath University by Bangladesh Chhatra League cadres, or we can say members. He was beaten to death, and the whole thing was on camera. We have the whole footage, and for some days the protest continued. People protested against the event, but nothing happened. Some of them were captured, and none of them faced death or capital punishment. And so, from the previous experiences, I can say that something satisfactory, or the criminals will face proper justice this time.
Okay, Kamruzzaman, what do you make of that? Because that's important, isn't it? If there is a precedent from before that such incidents have happened in the past years, as Abdullah there listed, are you confident that there will be justice in this case?
Actually, people are expecting that justice will be done here. But as per the ground reality and the harsh past example, we can't say that justice will be held here. But we hope. The fact is that there is also the example of giving mercy by the president a person who has already been guilted by law, by court, and have been served capital punishment, but they have been freed by the mercy of president. So actually, as those people have connectivity with the ruling party, so there is a concern of most of the people that where after this incident will be captured by some other incidents and media will not focus on these issues in near future, then something different may be happening. So there is a concern, but justice should be done here. Otherwise, thousands of the students who are studying in university, they will remain in uncertainty, and political environment in the campuses will be deteriorated by these incidents. So this is the expectation of most of the people that justice will be done here.
Okay. So, Morshed, on that topic then, about campuses and free speech on campus specifically, if there is, as Abdullah had listed before as well, a precedent that this has happened in the past also, will this case be the impetus for change then? Do you think that the Awami League will now go after this youth wing of it and properly then hold them to account or even disband them?
Well, whatever happened in the past, I cannot talk about that. But recently, this accident is really that everybody is going after and looking for justice. So, Awami League, from the very beginning, we have seen people being criticizing in their own party that this is not something that they had least expected. That's the first thing I really appreciate, because there was a mood of denying everything, whatever fault being done by the alliance and parties. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, the movement of the law and order enforcement to get these people who are involved with the murders is very fast. That's also a good sign to see and find out what's really going on. And let's see, because the things are changing. I am not going to talk about the old cases. The present case is something different that is really putting pressure on the government, and government is also sort of realizing that whatever in the name of the power being done is done by some individuals, but not in the name of the government, but using the power of the being in the government alliance. So I want to be hopeful, and realistically, the mode of denying or the behavior pattern we have seen by all the parties in the Bangladesh, not only Awami League, BNP, that they have whatever done by the alliance is always not well managed or well investigated. But this time, the behavior pattern is different. That is the only hope, because realistically, that without this hope, you got nothing to do. Because we cannot do, we are not authorized to do things, or we don't want to. We really want to see the justice.
Indeed. So let's talk about hope then, Abdullah, because Morshed is correct. You know, even Sheikh Hasina has called for proper investigation. She has promised justice to Abrar's family. Is there hope there? Because again, as Morshed there said, Abdullah, there is no denial that this happened, at least. So that is a step in a positive direction, right?
Okay. The thing we have to look for is that in past incidents, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina also did the same thing. If you recall the student movement in 2018, where for road safety, the school students, college students, and the university students were protesting for road safety. A group of individuals were wearing motorbike helmets, attacked the students multiple times, and some of the school students were seriously injured. Till now, we don't know who were those people wearing the helmets attacking us. Even when that whole incident was happening, our Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said that they will look into it. The police department of Bangladesh said that they will look into it, who these people were. They denied that they were Bangladesh Chhatra League. They were the part of Bangladesh Chhatra League, but we can say that before they said the same thing, but we didn't see any results. How can we be sure that this time we will see results? No, we will see justice. search.
Okay, so let's leave that as our final, gentlemen. But of course, we appreciate all three of you for your time today, and of course for providing insight and context for this case. That was Abdullah, MD Kamruzzaman, and Morshed, who were speaking to us from the Bangladeshi capital, Dhaka. This is certainly a disturbing case. Abrar Fahad, 21, as I said, found in his dormitory after he was beaten for at least 4 hours. There are some reports that said that even after those 4 hours of beating, he was alive for a little bit before being taken to the hospital, where possibly he died, or he died right in the dormitory itself. All of this because he had posted comments on social media criticizing the Bangladeshi government's deal with India, specifically a deal, the details of which he did not support, and questioned whether this would be good for the country. As one of our guests also mentioned, Sheikh Hasina has now promised the family justice. The father of Abrar has also demanded justice for his son, obviously, and there are protests ongoing across universities across Bangladesh as well at this time. So we're going to keep a close eye on this, because even in fact, a senior leader of the Awami League has told media that he thinks as well that this policy of this youth wing of the Awami League needs to be revisited, and whether or not it is really helpful towards governance in the country. I'll be back, though, with my last segment after this break. Stay tuned for that. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss EU's issue with migration. And of course, we know this has been a long-standing issue. We can go back to 2015, of course, when the numbers were significantly high. Over 1 million migrants arrived in the bloc at that time, mostly from countries like Syria or Iraq. And at that time, that sparked then one of Europe's biggest political crises, as the various member states of the bloc then bickered over who should take responsibility for them. It seems that even in 2019, we do not have any sort of agreement between the bloc's countries. At a meeting recently of interior ministers in Luxembourg, Germany, France, Italy, Malta were unable to win concessions on which countries would accept migrants. Only around 12 countries said they would be willing to accept migrants on a case-by-case basis, and only after a number of technical issues would be resolved. Now, add to this, an interesting piece of news coming out of France as well, is that President Macron of France says that France should not be, quote-unquote, too attractive to migrants, or to immigrants, I should say, pardon me. France, as you know, the statistics are important, saw 123,000 asylum applications in 2018. That is an increase of 22% compared to 2017. Let's discuss all of that a bit further. We're joined now firstly by Cecilia Sottilotta, who is an assistant professor of international relations and global politics at the American University of Rome. She's joining us now from the Italian capital. And joining us from the French capital, Paris, is Emmanuel Dupuy, who is president of the Institute for European Perspective and Security. Emmanuel and Cecilia, thank you both for your time this morning. Cecilia, I'd like to start with you. We obviously know that Italy is quite angry, if that's the word I should use, at other countries in the EU for not doing their part and sharing this migrant load. What do you make of why the others have not been willing to concede and compromise on this issue?
So, first of all, we should consider that Italy has a new government since the last time we talked about these issues. So the new Minister of Interior in Italy is a competent civil servant, we may say, with a long time experience in the field of also the management of migration on the territory. While the rhetoric and the attitude of the government, of the new government in Italy, may look different from what we had before, at the same time, as you rightly pointed out, the fact that Italy is no longer criminalizing sea rescue missions, for instance, does not mean that tackling this phenomenon somehow is still a priority for the government. Now, I see things quite clearly when it comes to why other countries are not ready to share the burden or reluctant to do so. And I see the main reason laying in domestic politics. We will talk about France more, I guess, in a moment, but it is impossible not to consider that many of these governments that are supposed to make pledges about accepting to take in migrants are governments which will need to face elections soon. Exactly. So in the case of France, for instance, we have the local elections in 2020, but the same happens for Seehofer in Germany. I mean, even the German Minister of Interiors, who is one of the promoters of these redistribution schemes, faces internal criticism. So I see domestic politics as the main factor driving this.
On that point, Cecilia, if you allow me, I wanted to put that point into Emmanuel, because, Emmanuel, to read that statement coming from President Macron, at least from me personally, as somebody who expected Macron would not say something like that as directly, was a bit shocking. How did you react to him saying, listen, France shouldn't be too attractive to immigrants? Coming from a country which is sort of scolding the rest of Europe that, listen, you need to do more vis-a-vis migrants coming on Europe's shores, that's kind of rich then, isn't it?
Well, I think you should not be too worried about that. First of all, it is a narrative. He is not the first president to speak about quotas. I have to say that Prime Minister Edouard Philippe, during the discussion in the Parliament, was clearer on why we have to be less attractive. First of all, you mentioned the fact that 123,000 asylum seekers, which brings France to be more attractive than Italy, for example. A bit less than Germany, but a bit more than Italy. The increase of 22% of these asylum seekers must be put in emphasis on the fact that there is the numbers of asylum seekers in Italy has been going down significantly. So, of course, it is a reality in Europe where there is, of course, a decrease in the asylum seekers, the seeking of these persons. When Emmanuel Macron and Edouard Philippe spoke about quotas, he was speaking about more cooperation and more solidarity amongst the European states. You mentioned the fact that there is the solidarity mechanism, which, of course, is difficult to put in reality, but it is again something which is on the table and which France and Germany have been advocating for a long time, not only during the Luxembourg meeting, but during the Minister of Interior meeting as well in the 23rd of September. We have to assess the fact that there needs to be more cooperation, more solidarity amongst the European states. It is not only about internal policy, it's about European dedication and European will to tackle this all together, and not only the most exposed countries, which of course brings us to Malta, Italy, France, and I have to say Spain. We have to assess the fact that there's been a shift in the migration routes. Most of the migrants, at least amongst the 100,000 people who crossed the Mediterranean last year, did not only come from the central Mediterranean, of course, bridging from Libya to Malta to Italy, but came from one side on a terrestrial basis from Turkey to Greece, and on the second, throughout the new corridor from Morocco and Spain. So it's not only about France and Italy litigating on whether or not they are more subject to be more attractive to the migrants. It's
so
Europe, and of course,
if I may come in here, because Cecilia, we can bog down, of course, about the reasons for why these many countries are deciding not to do their part, as the European bloc may argue, or Brussels may argue, if I may say. But then I wonder about if anybody's really thinking about the root causes of all this, because all of these people, be they coming from Syria, Iraq, or wherever, are not coming out of a vacuum, right? There was a situation created overseas that then led to them seeking safety from, be it persecution, war, poverty, or whatever. Why isn't Europe as a bloc then trying to address those reasons? And why isn't Europe also revisiting its own foreign policies, which may have contributed to all of the above?
Yeah, I think this is a very good question. Again, we are witnessing, I would say, another or an ongoing existential crisis in Europe. What does Europe stand for? In a recent speech, which much discussed speech, the new president of the EU Commission talked about preserving the European way of life. It seems like Europe is retrenching rather than opening up to possible solutions to global problems, which in turn may solve very local problems, such as the management of migration on the territory. So again, I see the situation as very problematic, politically speaking. In Italy, for instance, in the recent press conference, the Minister of Interiors, Lamorgese, mentioned the need to stabilize countries, for instance, in the southern rim of the Mediterranean. But what I see, I mean, that's my perspective, is mostly a short-term vision on how to, prevent migrants from leaving the shores of certain countries, including Tunisia, for instance, not only Libya and Morocco, for instance. So I don't really see a discussion about the root causes and serious political will to address those root causes.
Emmanuel, what are your thoughts on that? Because, again, if I'm just, picking on France for a moment, we can talk about France's overseas military involvements, be it Libya, as is reported, or Mali, or otherwise. I mean, the list really goes on. Do you think that France, for example, as a country, or that Europe as a bloc should be revisiting many of those policies that may very well have contributed to such a situation from occurring?
Well, I think to address your question, there's two answers. First of all, there's, of course, a need for a more robust and more autonomous and global European foreign policy, or European external action policy. Of course, that is the reality in the migrant crisis. I just put that in emphasis more, but not, again, newly. It is something which has been assessed for a long time. I must maybe disagree on the fact that most of the migrants come from the crisis in which we're engaged. That is not true in France. Among the top three asylum seekers in France, again, the 123,000 people who have asked asylum in France, the first is Albania, in which there is no war. The second is Afghanistan, in which there is a global responsibility and not only a European or a neighboring policy. And the third is Haiti, in which there is, of course, a constant crisis, not based on the fact that there is a war, but based on the fact that there is a problem of poverty. I think we must also assess the fact that the migrant crisis is not between the North and the South. It's mostly engaging African countries. 75% of the migrants coming and fueled by the wars that you mentioned in Sahel and in Libya do not go to Europe. Most of them go from the north to the south, from the south to the north, or east and west of African countries. So it's a responsibility that we have to engage on the African continent, and not only to take in consideration that we must or we should be responsible for the wars that we have done in the past, Libya in 2011, that we're doing now in Levant and in Syria and Iraq and in Sahel. I think it is too simple to bring that out, but I must agree that we have a responsibility to tackle that with our European partners, and I must put the answer in the other way around. Where are our European partners when we are engaging for the stabilization of Sahel, or when we're trying to find a solution in Libya?
All right, well, we'll leave it there for now. We, of course, appreciate Emmanuel and Cecilia for the time this morning. Cecilia speaking to us from Rome, and Emmanuel speaking to us there from the French capital, Paris. Viewers, do stay with us. We're going to continue talking about this topic after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're going to continue to discuss the topic that we were discussing before going into this break about that meeting of interior ministers of the EU in Luxembourg, where essentially countries were not able to once again agree on the redistribution or distribution, really, of migrants showing up on Europe's shores. And we, of course, know the many countries that are taking the crux of the migrants who are arriving on their shores, and one of them, of course, being Italy. And to discuss that further, then we're joined by two guests. We're joined by Mirko Giordani, who is a political analyst. He's joining us now from London. We're also joined by Antonio Scaramella, who is a geopolitical analyst, and he is joining us now from Rome. Mirko and Antonio, thank you both for your time this morning. Mirko, I'd like to start with you. What do you make of why Europe is not being able to resolve this issue? Back in 2015, certainly we had around 1 million or so show up on Europe's shores. Now a lot less are showing up, but even then, countries within Europe continue to just fight amongst themselves about this.
Yeah, because we are posing the wrong problem. The problem is not to redistribute migrants. or clandestines. The problem is not to make them depart from Libyan shorelines. The problem is that migration and migration policy are the core of national interest of nations. And it's naive to treat it at European level, So the most important thing is to shift from thinking that Europe must redistribute migrants to the fact that Europe and single states, and believe me, Italy needs to be at the forefront of this, needs to say, okay, we don't need to redistribute migrants, we need to stop them. They are not they are sometimes clandestines, and sometimes they are economic migrants, and there are refugees. So we need to create special channels for refugees, but economic migrants need to apply for the visa and need to depart to Italy and to Europe legally. For example, like migrants that depart from west of Africa, they are doing a route of thousands of kilometers passing from Niger and the porous borders between Niger and Libya. We need to invest there with intelligence gathering. We need to stop the smuggling of people, and we need to stop people that are making profits and making money by, and I'm telling you seriously because I've made a research while I was in a think tank in Jerusalem. Smugglers, they are making tons of money by selling these people to the boat people in Libya. So like the problem is that we don't think about redistribute them, we need to stop them.
Okay, Antonio, what are your thoughts on that? Because certainly, I imagine there are two sides of this, right? There's one, as Mirko there said, we need to separate the genuine refugees who may be fleeing war, persecution, whatever, and they have a genuine case to be seeking asylum in whatever respective European country they may show up in or otherwise. But then there's the others who may be just economic migrants trying to slip in and or just being victims of human trafficking. How does Europe deal with this humanely while also protecting its own security, its own borders?
Okay, so first of all, sadly, I have to disagree with my colleague talking about the fact that you need to stop them. Yes, of course, you could stop them, but problem is there is a lot of people moving. They're pushing away from Africa, away from Middle East. They're pushing towards Europe, and until we are able to build an Atlantic wall, like a sea wall or something like that, it's completely impossible. The point is you need to handle this incoming flux of people, which will be incoming now and probably for the next 10 years even. So Europe, of course, needs to protect its interests and protect human rights on which European Union was founded. So therefore, I believe that the accord taken by the interior ministers in Malta is a good first step, a baby step, probably, but still something that moves forward, since, of course, it's not Italy, it's not only Greece, nor Spain, or Portugal that have the economic resources, the manpower to sustain such an incoming flux of people. Okay. Now we are also forgetting about the Greece problem because Turkey stops part of the migrants coming from the Middle East wanting to go through the Balkan route and the Greece route. But considering the fact that most likely Turkey is going to be more interested in Syria, as we know they're moving towards the north of Syria, probably they will not put so many resources in there. They're going to use those migrants as a lever for gaining, as leverage for the European Union, either to ask more money or just let them go and flow again.
Mirko, I think it's important, Mirko, to talk about as well, because we've brought up Africa, and I think it's important, isn't it, Mirko, to understand that none of these people who are leaving, be it Africa or North Africa or the Middle East or other places even in the world, they're not leaving in a vacuum, right? In Africa, for example, I was just reading a report today that the World Bank has released a report saying extreme poverty will become almost exclusively an African phenomenon by 2030, where 90% then of the world's poor will be projected to live just on that continent. Now, certainly, Mirko, I imagine you would not argue that for a poor person living in poverty, that they do not have the right to then seek a better life, for example, in Europe or elsewhere?
I first want to answer to my colleague. Like I seriously dislike this apocalyptic version of migration. Modern nation states have the means and the power to empower the border and to make a border not porous. So like nation state can stop flow of migrants. To answer to your question, Waqar, it's a very interesting question. It's a very good question. You know, the problem is that there is the right to migrate, yes, but as Pope Benedict XVI said, there is also the right not to migrate. So the problem is, how can Africa can be rich or can be developed in the next years? I believe that the right answer is not by giving them aid, as we are doing now, because as we know, this money coming from the West, from Europe, from America, and from other nation states, they are going into autocrats and other corrupted political leaders in Africa. So the African Union some weeks ago started the biggest free market area in the world by African nation states. So I believe that the only answer to poverty in Africa is let them develop via the tools that free market, and let me say it proudly, capitalism can give them. We have to stop to think that Africa can grow only via our money, only via the development. You know, like there is this boasting in Europe said, yeah, we will grow the budget aid to Africa. No, it's wrong. It's the wrong answer.
But I mean, Mirko, if I may, because, you know, the one thing that's stuck in my mind as you've been speaking there about Africa is that Europe has a historic role in Africa, doesn't it? Especially with many European countries that were colonial masters, if I may use that term, or just colonial powers, and they had their colonies in Africa. I mean, isn't there some responsibility in some ways, even in a minute way, for the current situation that some of those African countries may find themselves in?
The fact is that we have done what we had done. And the fact is that what happened with African countries is history. We have done it. Italy has done it. England has done it. Germany has done it. France and Spain. We have done it, okay. But it's the past. Now it's a different time. We are living in the present. We have to deal pragmatically with reality. And the only way for African countries to grow is to allow free market forces to develop and to spread. What happened between African countries and European countries is happened in the past. It was tragic. History acknowledged it. That's it. But now the only way is to let African do better for African themselves and allow them the right not to migrate. This is the point.
Antonio, what are your thoughts on that?
Again, strongly disagree with what my colleague just said. True that history is in the past, but sadly history has always consequences, and we should learn from it. So, of course, bringing them money is one thing we tried. Again, as with the migrant question, we're moving with baby steps. We tried with giving them a lot of money. A lot of it went to waste or went into criminal activities and so on and so forth. So Africa indeed has problems. Most of its problems depend on how we as European Western cultures in general, we've dealt with Africa in the past years and also in the present, because Africa is very rich of resources which European states mostly still control, either clearly or in a more shadow, nuanced way. So claiming that Africa can do everything on its own, it's very complicated. Believing that we have the manpower to stop all these people is, again, I believe wrong. Because either we do have the manpower of actually wiping them out at the moment they arrive to Libya. Of course, you can just put a battalion there and just kill them all. But of course, that wouldn't be great compared to human rights and whatever you would think of the importance of human life in general, if I would say. So there is no possible way you stop all of them. You can stop some of them. We've tried with the former government by a left-wing government of Italy, led by Paolo Gentiloni, to create some hotspots or areas inside of Libya where we could decide beforehand whether they are economic migrants, they are refugees, and so on and so forth. These places, due to lack of funds, corruption, is just in a state which basically doesn't exist. Because let's be honest, Libya has a state right now, doesn't really exist, transformed into something that, sadly, as we've seen from so many images, videos, and pictures, they really look like concentration camps. So due to European experience and history, once again, which should be our greatest teacher on how to carry on in our future decisions, we shouldn't allow these kind of things. Of course, the problem cannot be solved by Italy, as I said before. But on the other hand, Europe is big, and Europe is not that big, of course, compared to other countries, but it's very rich. Resources are there, resources are present, and everyone needs to do their part. Which means that Hungary, just for the fact that it's...
Antonio, I'm going to have to interrupt. We do appreciate both you and Mirko for putting this into context for us. Of course, there are viewers, both sides of this argument, and we've heard a number of the sides of the argument when it comes to this issue of migrants and how Europe deals with them. Should they be dealt with on an individual nation-state level? Certainly, every nation-state's right to protect its borders is one that is, of course, universally accepted. Not every migrant needs to be accepted. A country does have the right to refuse a migrant, an asylum seeker, etc., be they an economic migrant or genuinely fleeing persecution. But then what of then human rights and these huge moral values that Europe speaks of? And then also the reason I brought up Africa is because of Europe's role in Africa historically. We cannot just see Africa's current poverty situation in a vacuum, can we? We need to be able to factor into this discussion that Europe was a colonizer for a very significant amount of time in places like Africa, and its effect still lingers on till today. And those very colonizers cannot now turn around and say to their previous colonial slaves that you now do not have the right to come into what was once your master's country. Certainly complex issues. There are no easy answers to all of this, but every factor needs to be discussed out in the open. I'll leave it there for now, though. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.